So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the public assurance meeting of Monday, the 7th of December 2020. It's yet another virtual meeting as we're starting to get used to in this unusual year that we've had. So just to greet everybody that's here to take part in the meeting. I understand that we have a couple of people that are doing some urgent work elsewhere and could be joining us during the meeting that are on your team, Chief. So I'll let you sort of allude to that. But from your side, who have we got in the room?
Thank you, Commissioner. As you say, with apologies from DCC Harwin, we had apologies from Acting DCC Wilson, but she's appears to have just popped up on my screen. So Karen, do you want to say hello?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and apologies in advance. I do have something operational going on that I may need to step out to deal with, and I shall be back as and when. So if there's anything that's directed for me, if I'm not here, then I'll be able to pick up as and when I come back in. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Karen. And Acting ACC Chris Davison has also joined us. Chris, you want to say hi?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody.
And as I say, ACO White is dealing with a piece of national critical infrastructure. There's a goal group running for that, so he will join us as soon as he can, pending the end of that meeting.
Excellent, thank you for that, Chief. I understand we've also got your head of crime in the meeting as well, Andrew Cox, who I can see he's on there. I think he's talking to the Crimestoppers report a little bit later on. And from my office, I'm just going to go down the list, make sure I miss nobody out. I have Julie Flint, the Chief Financial Officer for the OPCC, Malcolm Birch, who is the Chief Executive of the OPCC, Adam Muspratt, who is the intern who's facilitating everything for us today. We have also got Lucy Pettit, who is also assisting Adam, Stuart Tweedale, who is the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, and Aubrey Williams, who kindly in his role pulls all of the information together for today and makes sure that it all runs smoothly, so no pressure there, Aubrey. And I think we also have Gemma Peacock from Force Comms as well, and I think that completes the lineup of everybody that's in the room today. So going back to the agenda, just to say welcome to everybody who is here, and by small update from me, there are only a couple of things I want to say really, one of which since we last met, probably the biggest decision that I've had to take since becoming Police and Crime Commissioner, apart from the appointment of Chief Constables, which is the second point I'll make, is around whether we were to seek an extension on the G4S contract. And it was decided that that would not happen. So the G4S contract, which covers 18 services for Lincolnshire Police, covering a significant amount of money, around £200 million over the next 5 years, potentially worth of areas of business, would not be renewed. So from March 22, we will need to have found an alternative method of providing those services. And I think that's quite a significant piece of work that we're now undertaking to identify the best routes for all of those. Very conscious that there is a significant number of Lincolnshire residents that work in those areas of business who will want clarity as soon as possible about their futures, as well as the importance to the force and the wider public as a result of those decisions that will be made. So just to reassure really that those thoughts are very much at the forefront of not just my mind, but I know your mind, Chief, as we've been in those discussions, and that we'll continue to work together to build a programme team to actually work through what is a significant programme of work over coming weeks, months, and ultimately years to deliver those services. I'll throw it over to you in a minute because I'm sure you'll want to say something about that. But before I do, just say the other significant element I mentioned is around the recruitment of Chief Constables, and it feels like a lifetime ago that you and I were meeting and greeting after your own appointment, and now, after a very distinguished career spanning 3 decades, we're coming close to the point where we will be wishing you well on your next journey as you hand over the baton to somebody else incoming to take up your role. And it'd be remiss of me if I didn't thank you very much for not just your service to Lincolnshire, which is greatly appreciated, but your service to the UK as a whole in the various roles you've held, both in your not just as Chief Constable here, but your national roles with the portfolio work you've done to support policing nationally, as well as your other roles, both Devon and Cornwall up in Scotland, that have covered 3 distinguished decades of service. So thank you very much for that on behalf of everybody that you have impacted in those years. And I'll just pass over to you whether you would wish to comment on either of those 2 items before we move on.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for the kind words. It's a cliche to say that the 3 decades have kind of gone past in the blink of an eye, but it's one that has a sense of truism for me, and particularly the last 4 years. They have been the proudest moments of my career, and I will look back very fondly on Lincolnshire Police and everything that it's meant to me and to my family to be here and to be in the honourable position of being Chief Constable of the force. It will be for my successor and others to kind of judge how well that has gone, but I certainly feel that we've done our very level best to support the people of Lincolnshire and provide the best service that we possibly can. And it's in I suppose my time, our time, that we've introduced these meetings, the public assurance meetings, and the ability to speak directly to the public on the issues of policing in their area. And I think that's a really important part of the kind of transparency and the a democratic way in which we can provide policing. And I suppose that does kind of link into the first issue in terms of the return of the 18 or so sort of critical functions that are provided through the G4S contract to the Lincolnshire Police and Lincolnshire's OPCC, and how we are going to collectively manage that transition between now and the 31st of March 2022 and beyond. And we're sort of at the outset, doing our utmost to be very careful as to how we approach that, given, as you've said, not just the huge impact it has on the services, but on the many hundreds of people who are currently employed to provide those services, and how we transition not just the services but the people as well. So a lot of work that will be in play for the foreseeable future in order to manage that as best as we all can, and to come through onto it with a strong and resilient and very well performing police force. So I'm sure that my successor will pick that up as their first and most important item. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you for that. And I guess it would be right of me just to give a little bit about the timeline. You will be leaving us hopefully at midnight on the dot of the 18th of December. So you'll be with us until that point. We have the Police and Crime Panel confirmation hearing on this Thursday at 6:30 in the evening, where they will consider my preferred candidate, and they need to make a decision as to whether they support that candidate, and subject to that, then we hope to obviously have a Chief Constable in a position from the point at which you leave, but that determined obviously at the Police and Crime Panel meeting, and then they potentially have a few days to consider that before letting me know their views on it. So by the 14th of December we will know exactly where we are with that, but these things do tend to run quite close to the wire. So moving on to the next item, which would be public questions. Aubrey, have we got any questions that we need to address?
No, I can confirm we've had no public questions.
Okay, so we'll move straight on then to the next item, which is the focus report working with Crimestoppers. So I don't know whether that's over to you, Chief, or whether it's over to your head of crime.
Yep, thank you, Commissioner. You'll be in possession of the report Lincolnshire Police working with Crimestoppers, November 2020, which sets out some of the areas of work that we've been involved with the Crimestoppers charity, some of the successes that that relationship has brought to us. Before I hand over to Andy Cox, the head of crime, I suppose just from my perspective, I feel that we have had a good and positive relationship with the Crimestoppers strategy and with the level of work that they've tried to do around various crime types, and that has evolved from, largely speaking, focused around drugs and criminality around drugs into other areas of criminality, and we've been very keen to work with them on the development of that over the last few years. It's a very good relationship and one that I'm glad that we're involved in. But for some more detail of the report and some more of the highlights, I'll pass on to Andy. Is that okay? Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Hi, afternoon, Commissioner, and everybody else online. Just briefly, and just in terms of national perspective around Crimestoppers, 10 people every day are arrested nationally because of a Crimestoppers submission. It's obviously a means for the public to report confidentially when they might not wish to speak to police nor to any particular authority. So it's something we fully engage with. We're really supportive of. And as the Chief just rightly said, I mean, we have a very strong relationship with Crimestoppers. I meet regularly with the Crimestoppers lead for the region and talk through the campaigns that we'd like to pursue, the support that we can offer them, and to essentially agree a marketing strategy to maximise any intelligence submissions we can get. We have focused heavily around county lines. We have focused around domestic abuse, organised crime as well. And we're trying to pursue CSE in the coming period. We've also focused on two particular areas of the county, so very much targeting themes, but also targeting locations. So we have done Gainsborough and West Lindsey in particular. Loads of positives. So we've seen substantial amounts of Twitter and other forms of social media impressions. We therefore know it's reaching, the campaigns have reached a large audience. I think in a Twitter campaign, over 40,000 people were reached through it, which I think is very significant for Lincolnshire, and it's the right sort of people. So it's young people, which is the audience that we were seeking to capture. We've used newsletters, we've used other forms of mainstream media as well. So there was a feature on BBC Lincolnshire, a Radio Lincolnshire around it, and also BBC local television. So we have engaged a number of different outlets to try and promote the need for the public to report Crimestoppers, and that's ultimately what we're after. So when we do these campaigns, we've done them around drugs, sexual violence, modern slavery, stalking in the past. It's very much to engage public, to notice and become aware of the ability to report confidentially, to give us the intelligence we need to then go and action it. And when we look at the outcomes achieved over the last period, which the paper obviously alludes to, we had 194 Crimestoppers reports, which was a rise of 160% over the relevant period of that bespoke targeted intensive operation. So more than double the amount of reports we've got gives us an opportunity to obviously prevent crime and tackle offending. We're really clear there was a part of it was operation, or it's referred to as the Fearless campaign, and that's very much targeting young people. And we used two particular case studies where essentially we put ourselves in the position of young people and give them explain how the impact these two people have had, and therefore the benefits that can come from referring intelligence through Crimestoppers to ourselves. So it's really a case of almost raising the issue with the public, making it something that their conscience pricks up and that they want to actually recognise abuse, recognise the type of criminality that occurs and actually do something about it and being part of the solution. And therefore Crimestoppers gives them the means to refer confidentially to ourselves. So lots and lots of campaigns, lots and lots of focus, a good strong working relationship, and obviously positivity in terms of the amount of referrals we've got, and that's obviously our plan to continue.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I mean, Crimestoppers are obviously, I think, one of those organisations that is a brand that most of the public would recognise. It's something that most people have heard of, and it is obviously an organisation that annually I provide some funding towards, as do other PCCs, to enable them to do their local and national activities. And I think one of the things that's key is, as you've alluded to, the anonymous way in which people can contact them. And in fact, when speaking to Crimestoppers, it's clear that their systems are designed that they never at any point actually receive identifiable information about individuals. So when people contact Crimestoppers, their systems have already anonymised those contacts. So it isn't a case that Crimestoppers aren't forwarding on the information to the police. It's the fact that Crimestoppers never received that information in the first place. And I think that should give a level of confidence to people that really feel concerned about wanting to share information but do not feel able to share their own information as part of that. And obviously I would wish people to feel comfortable and confident in coming direct to the police to be able to give that evidence, because obviously it is exceedingly helpful if you have that information, you're able to work with individuals to help keep them and the community safe. But I do think there is a valuable area of work that Crimestoppers do. I suppose from my point of view, I can see the value in targeting individual crime types to individual areas, but let's be clear, something such as, for example, drugs, which is something Crimestoppers are known for generally, and equally something we've used there as an example for targeting in Gainsborough and the wider West Lindsey area. Is that part of a standardised approach? Is this a new approach? Is it something we're likely to roll out across the county to work with other local authorities? What's the thinking behind that?
Okay. Sorry, Karen, I think you're trying to come in. Karen, you're on mute. I don't know if you're
Yeah, I'll go after you.
Okay. I think so. I mean, I look at it and think, so that the campaigns that have shown themselves to work in these areas and to promote the amount of intelligence we're receiving through Crimestoppers, as you rightly say, which is confidentialised, and it's just one small part of a bigger picture of intelligence that we have that we can utilise. So I very much encourage the public listening to continue to report, because it's one strand that we use as part of a bigger picture. So lessons we've learned from these campaigns in terms of the ability it's had to increase intelligence, increase awareness, targeting particularly relevant communities, in many of these cases young people, is shown to work. So we can take that lesson and apply it everywhere, and we can apply it in terms of different types of themes as well, whether that be domestic abuse, CSE, and other things that we've got planned that are coming. So essentially I very much see it as an ability to market an intelligence opportunity for the public to be part of a solution that helps us police.
And if I can just add to that, Andy, he's given a really thorough overview of what we're doing now. I don't think we've always been as proactive in determining where our campaigns should be, but that's definitely the flavour that we have now, some of our future thinking, and that all fits into our whole intelligence review that we started last year, about being much more proactive in what we're instigating in terms of some of these campaigns. The other area that I just want to highlight, I know Andy's already highlighted the two stories, Aaron's story and Amy's story, but we haven't got the expertise and the connections in force as some other agencies such as Crimestoppers on Instagram and Snapchat, and using their expertise that they've had from up and down the country and their campaigns, they're able to reach out to a younger audience and to give other avenues of support to a younger audience who may feel very nervous about coming forward to the police. And that's something I really want to concentrate and enhance as we go forward with some of our new campaigns.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I am very conscious that there's a huge difference between activity and outcome. And it's good to see in this report that we've got evidence of both, because clearly the number of people that view something on a social media page doesn't necessarily lead to any change of behaviour or increase of reporting, or indeed action by the police if they get an increase of reporting. So it's good to see that there is that outcome focus as well. And I think that would be really useful moving forward for us to see, both what's actually being done, but also what difference it's making. And that helps me certainly from a funding perspective, because obviously every year Crimestoppers and many other organisations come forward and ask for funding, and often increased funding in a very challenging situation for them, but also for us, and we have to make those budget decisions. So it's always very helpful when we're making those decisions to know how well things are working for you, the police, and ultimately for keeping the community safe. So I think that is really, really helpful. I suppose one of the things that might be useful, I don't know whether Aaron and Amy's stories are still available to view. It might be interesting to put the links together with the information that we publish regarding this meeting, so people can actually see those specifically. There was something else I was going to ask regarding the campaign. Oh, I know what it was. You, Andy, you mentioned CSE. Just for anybody that's watching, you're talking about child sexual exploitation and abuse. So I just wanted to make that point, because not everybody will understand
That's right.
the shorthand for that. And again, that is an area where obviously we want to work closely. The other thing that we will be able to do is use the newly established Youth Commission to obviously support this, especially interested in what works for young people, because I think the DCC hit upon a particularly challenging area, which is around how we engage with younger people that historically do not tend to come forward and report things. We know disproportionately they can be victims of crime, and they don't always let us know about that. And it's understanding how they would wish to be interacted with and what is likely to reach them as a message, because I'm not convinced that policing as a whole understands that particularly well. And certainly from a Lincolnshire perspective, I know that I can't sit here and say that I understand that particularly well. And that's why the Youth Commission, I think, will be particularly useful for us all in genuinely reaching out and understanding how to actually get those messages across to keep our community safe at every age group. I don't know whether anybody else has got any questions regarding this element, whether you have, Malcolm, Stuart, anybody?
No, nothing from me, thanks, Commissioner.
Nothing from me, Mark.
Okay, that's great. I think the other thing as well, which I mean, Crimestoppers obviously has been used as a way for people to report crime, to give you information to then take action upon. I think there is that element as well, a bit like Neighbourhood Watch, where it's getting ahead of that to prevent crime in the first place. And I think we can continue those discussions between yourselves, ourselves, and Crimestoppers and others to say, well, how do we actually get information out there, whether it's about fraud and scams, whether it's about child exploitation, county lines, whatever, in a proactive way of just developing in the consciousness of the public a greater level of resilience and understanding to prevent them and their neighbours being victims of crime. And I think that's something that I'm particularly keen to work on, how we can actually prevent, rather than trying to just use it for information to pick up the pieces afterwards. I think that is another area we can develop, and we can probably help shape what works for Lincolnshire in that space. You're welcome to comment on that, but you don't have to. It's not something that I'm seeking to give you a question on, but if you have, then by all means do that, and if not, we will move on to the next item.
I definitely see opportunity around the whole youth engagement and that whole piece you talked through. I think there's real scope for us to make sure our message is out there, both preventative and sort of intelligence led to take action as well. So we'll see how we best use that in the next period going forward.
Thank you for that. And just I mean, before I let you go, I would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that you are fairly new to our force, Andy, as head of crime, and that you have hit the ground running, it's fair to say, on your wish to tackle criminality across the county. And I just wanted to make the point that the force targeting teams that you mention on social media are coming up with some really good results. And I think it's, you know, from a public point of view, when I speak to the public, the one thing they sort of hope that the force are always focused on is tackling crime and preventing crime. And it's great to see that as head of crime, you've obviously got that clarity of focus. So thank you for that. I think it will make a real difference to the public, knowing that not just that the force are doing it, but you're telling them exactly what you are doing as well. Because often the force do some incredibly good work. It's getting that message out to the public to tell them exactly what it is, and I think that's coming across very well. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
So moving on then to the integrated performance report, which is back over to you, Chief.
Thank you, Commissioner. So if I just say a few general words of introduction, and then we can go into the various sections, and I'll draw your attention to the Chief's narrative, and clearly if there's any particular pages or any particular questions, then either myself or one of my colleagues will kind of pick that up. General introduction then. Operationally, we are very much still in the throes of the national pandemic and what it means for Lincolnshire and Lincolnshire's communities, what it means in terms of our work as an emergency service and with partners across the Local Resilience Forum. There's a huge amount in there. As I have done with public messaging before, I would continue to say that the public of Lincolnshire have been overwhelmingly compliant with the asks that have been made of them. A few isolated incidents, a couple recently in relation to some student activity and parties on student premises, but they have been dealt with. The overwhelming, as I say, nature of the response from the communities of Lincolnshire has been good, compliant and positive, and I think that in the short, medium and long term will be very good for the community as a whole. The issues around where we sit with our restrictions are obviously under review, and will be done so at a national level on the 16th of December. As it stands at the moment, we are in Lincolnshire in Tier 3, so at the kind of highest level that exists across the country, and that means that there are various restrictions in place in regard to people's movement and the businesses and premises which can be open. Karen has been chairing some meetings recently in relation to the Operation Tala, which is the name for our response across UK, certainly across England and Wales, in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll ask her just to say a few words about where we are with our response in just a second or two. The other piece of context is where we are financially. Commissioner, you're well aware of the budget setting process and how close to the line we get each year. It feels sometimes we're kind of over the line by the time we hear where we are with some things. It's fair to say, I think, that the announcements by the Chancellor in terms of the settlement for the Home Office and therefore the settlement for policing is positive. There are still things to answer in it, but some of the assistance with some of the potential gaps in our budget around council tax and so on are very much kind of welcome. As I say, that doesn't preempt any decisions that lie ahead in terms of what the overall budget kind of looks like. But certainly some of those financial pressures are slightly eased, and the national uplift continues to be a central promise on which this government seems kind of determined to deliver, which means that we continue to push ahead with our recruitment across Lincolnshire for more officers, and to try and do our level best to use our money wisely so that we can continue to invest where possible in staff. So a sort of reasonably optimistic picture in many ways in some of the forward look that we have around the force, and we'll come on to a bit more of those details in the report itself. But at this stage, I just kind of hand over to Karen just for a few words on where we are with our COVID-19 response. Karen.
Thanks, Chief. So as Chief said, Operation Tala, our force response, is also connected very, very closely to both the Local Resilience Forum and the county-wide response, but also the national response that we have across policing. Just some headlines for us here in Lincolnshire regarding our staff wellbeing and staff sickness or isolation. We have different colour-coded categories as to how much abstraction we've got as a result of Tala-related isolation or sickness, and that goes from blue, green, amber and red, with green being the lowest number of absences. And we are in that position at the moment. We have a fairly low number of people who are either tested positive or who are self-isolating as a result of track and trace or being around somebody who's got symptoms. And that has been the case throughout, although we've had an increase in positive tests over the last month or two. We're still not in any sort of danger resource-wise for criticality to how we respond to the public. We're probably one of the better forces across our region for how we've been operating in a number of different areas, such as our training regime, having the right level of kit and equipment that supports officers to make sure that they're as safe as they can be while they're out dealing with incidents, and also while officers are as safe as they can be in the workspace, so in the back office environment. We have quite a lot of agile working. We've provided people with laptops and the IT solutions to be able to work agilely from home or more remotely, so they're not all having to be in one space at one time. And that has reduced any levels or any risks of cross-contamination. So all of that is a good picture, but we do have really strong welfare teams centrally organised that reach out and support officers who are in a vulnerable position or suffering. And tragically, we do have some people whose families are affected, and the impact, both mentally as well as physically, is something that we share with the rest of the county. There's probably not very many people now who don't know somebody who's been impacted by COVID in a negative way, so we do share that with the rest of our county family. Regarding the operational impacts, we've really engaged well with our communities, as the Chief's mentioned, largely compliant community. One of the issues that has been raised to us previously nationally is about disproportionality of fixed penalty notices, and we have a very robust system in place where each one of those fixed penalty notices is robustly scrutinised. And we also link in with our independent advisory group to have that layperson's oversight as a critical friend to ensure that we're not disproportionately targeting or inadvertently targeting a particular protected group. So I'm quite comfortable with where we are with how we're managing that. We don't have huge amounts of fixed penalty notices that we give out. We do still engage with the 4 E's, which is the engage, explain, encourage before we go to enforcement. However, in the last month, as the second lockdown came into being, the engagement and explanation has largely been out there for several months, and we are encouraging if we find any breaches, but we will move quicker to the enforcement activity, which has been seen over recent student parties, which I have to say is it's not widespread. It's certainly not the same as other force areas have seen in their colleges and universities, but we have stamped down on those quite hard. We've supported the local resilience forum with one of our chief superintendents, Paul Timmins. He's moved across there permanently for this period of time, for the second lockdown, to give that greater resilience to our partners. And he will be there up until at least March. Hopefully by the time we get vaccines, etc. rolling out, then we'll be in a better position to start moving back to business as usual for policing. But at this moment in time, public health is still very, very much at the forefront of what we're delivering. Happy to take any other questions that the Commissioner might have on that.
OK, thank you very much, Karen. I appreciate that Andrew has joined us as well. Andrew, was there anything from your involvement in the Optala work that you want to add?
No, I mean, the only thing I'd say is we shouldn't underestimate just the amount of effort that's gone into making our workplaces secure. So Kerry mentioned our training, but anybody that was to enter any of our workplaces could not fail to be hit by all of the aspects that we've put in terms of markings on floors, dividers between desks, using all our available space to keep this as a COVID secure workplace. And we've done that very much to keep the organisation operational. But there's been some tremendous efforts by people to do that. And as Karen said, I think the outcomes have shown that, in fact, whereas we've seen with other police forces across the country, some quite large scale losses from contacts within the workplace, not out on operational duty. Ours has been much more confined and much more isolated than that.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Andrew. Commissioner, before I go into the first section of the integrated report, is there anything on Optala that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I mean, there's a couple of things which you may pick up later in the report, or you can pick them up now. I'll leave that to you, but they're related to Optala. But I mean, obviously, one of the things we know is that crime statistics nationally have been skewed somewhat by the challenges of Optala. And obviously, one of the things that's been directly impacted has been around the recording of antisocial behaviour, because obviously incidents that relate to this have then been recorded as further ASB incidents. And it's to understand really both locally and nationally, is there a piece of work going on to separate out what would be Optala ASB incidents from the rest, because otherwise obviously it's very difficult for the public to understand whether there is additional antisocial behaviour in the traditional sense of the word, or whether it's directly related to this. So I don't know if that's something that you could give me a little bit of information on.
Certainly, Commissioner. So I'm glad to say that we led as Lincolnshire a piece of national work to look at the effect that the COVID-19 reporting period would have on the what we call comparative data. So when people see the integrated report, the graphs quite clearly show that over the period of lockdown and in the first instance and then second lockdown, that the impact on reported crime is quite stark, and that can either be a reduction or for antisocial behaviour, it can show as quite a peak, quite a large rise. What we've led on was, well, how are you going to make sense of that? I mean, for public interpretation, also for police statistics, in terms of when we use the modelling of information to inform intervention activity, or where do you put your resources, largely based on where you see crime happening, and the significant fluctuations over the course of the last 9 months mean that we find ourselves in quite a statistically difficult position about making comparisons. So we laid on some work on that and suggested that there's a number of ways you can do it. Essentially, you kind of isolate out that period of time and don't use it for a comparison because it is so extraordinary. And that will be there. Normally, there is what's called a 3-year rolling period, which forms some of the comparisons. So essentially, you're going to have to take that action for the next 3 years, so that before you get back to a period of time which is essentially relatively kind of stable. Actually looking at a particular crime type and extracting out, so as you say, for antisocial behaviour, what is specific COVID related antisocial behaviour and what is non-COVID related antisocial behaviour, that's slightly more of a difficult task because of the way in which it's recorded on the various systems that we have. And that which presents more of a challenge to extract it. What I can say is that the advancement in search tools means that we are looking forward to hopefully being able to bring in a piece of equipment that will allow us to investigate our systems easier. So it doesn't matter the fact that they are tagged in or categorized in a particular way. You can search in a much kind of freer way, which I know for people on their smartphones using the various search application engines that are out there sounds like a sort of thing that we should have and be able to do as a matter of routine. But it's just a system of larger organizations. The bigger you get as an organization, the more data you have, the slightly more complicated that method becomes, and certainly the more expensive it becomes. The immediate future looks like us treating this period as an extraordinary period and making comparisons differently, and then the medium-term future looks at us being able to look at the figures in a way that the way that they've been categorised is less important. So we can draw out, as you say, ones that are COVID related from those that are not, and avoid having to do very manually intensive kind of research work. And which means that it might be some delay before we're able to kind of make it really clear to the public. Hopefully the graphs speak for themselves, and the graphs show the variance over the last 9 months, so that the words themselves just help to inform what the graphs are actually saying. But that's probably where we're sitting with that issue at the moment, Commissioner.
Okay, so I think you've all but answered this, but just for clarity, really, how are the force managing to track emerging issues? Because obviously, in effect, you're trying to see through all of the Taller fog that's misting up the normal business that you would look at. So it's trying to understand really from a public perspective where that assurance is around if there are emerging risks and challenges, how are they being identified and addressed? Yep.
What I'll do, Commissioner, is rather than me try to explain it, I'll pass to Chris Davison, who's kind of one of the people who's responsible for actually being able to do that and see through the fog of 19. So Chris, perhaps over to you.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner, just in terms of understanding and separating out those issues which matter to people on a local level over and above those which are COVID related. The systems we've got in place are essentially daily management meetings which involve the neighbourhood policing leads for each area. So you'll know that we've got really dedicated neighbourhood policing inspectors. Their daily business is to look through anything that's occurred in their area in the last 24 hours that's antisocial behaviour related, and ensure that those that require that kind of problem solving approach or further kind of policing interaction are dealt with. So we're able to make sure that those cases are being dealt with and logged on the eSINs shared system, which we share with colleagues from district councils. So albeit on a top line statistical basis, at the moment it all looks like it's the same thing there. Certainly on a very practical operational level, our officers are very easily and quickly able to separate so that we can deal with them effectively.
Thank you for that. And Karen, you want to come in?
Yes, please. Just in addition to what Chris has just covered there, that is very locally the here and now information. But if this time next year we were to try and understand what was going on when we start doing that longer term understanding of the patterns and trends that we have, we're hoping that the new tool that we're going to be investing in soon will be able to allow us to interrogate that data in a much more practical way without having the resources to be able to sit down and interrogate every single aspect of data, because currently the thousands of incidents that we have on an annual basis sometimes takes a huge amount of personal effort from individuals and person power to be able to interrogate that, whereby systems and performance investigation tools will be able to give us some of those if we put the right search criteria in a much more meaningful way as we go forward.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So over to you, Chief, for the next section.
Thank you, Commissioner. So the Chief Constable's commentary is on page 10 of the integrated report and covers the first section. A couple of things I'd highlight here. First of all, that notwithstanding everything we've just said about the complexity of interpreting recorded crime during the last 9 months, what the graphs kind of show, so they are the display of recorded crime in the main categories, is that we were in a peak as we knew it in the last calendar year, so just over 12 months ago, and that as we moved into COVID, we started to see kind of reductions, but the reductions have started to take place before that. And when we've seen the restrictions lifted, whilst levels have increased, they haven't gone back to the levels they were a year ago. And there's some particular kind of reasonably good news stories in there around things such as acquisitive crime, so theft offences, vehicle crime, and kind of burglary. The second kind of point I would make, we did have a kind of substantial report last time, our last performance meeting on violence, so I won't go into that in any detail. But in this report, we kind of highlight Operation kind of Raptor, and again, I'd invite Chris, I suppose, because there's a particular focus on the east. If Chris wants to say a few words in terms of where Operation Raptor sat within the operational delivery for that area, and particularly targeting the weapon-enabled violent crime, and then we'll open up for questions. So, Chris, maybe just a couple of words on Op Raptor.
Yes, thank you, boss. Yeah, so Operation Raptor launched across the east, really a whole range of different strands to it. So, firstly, there's the issue of identifying who the most dangerous offenders are, as you might expect us to, with this dealing with violent crime, making sure that we've got operations in place to arrest those and make sure that they're prosecuted. So, as an example, over at Skegness, supported very much so by Andy's team from intelligence, identified some premises and people, especially across on the coast, and sworn out search warrants. And as a consequence of those investigations now ongoing into serious violence. But we've also had, as you'll see in the report there, amnesties and also working through colleagues through the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, and in particular Stay Safe, what we can do from an educational piece as well. So they're very much focused on prevention as well as enforcement, understanding that yes, you can enforce your way through the most dangerous offenders that you have now. You also need to invest in prevention to prevent future people becoming serious violence offenders.
Thank you very much, Chris. Commissioner, any questions on the first section of the report?
No, I think just really to comment on the fact that I think it is good to see that Lincolnshire is sort of ahead of the national average when it comes to the reductions around those elements of theft, you know, which cover a few different areas. And I think that these areas are of particular concern to the public. So that is particularly good to see. And, you know, these things, and, you know, some people may say, well, obviously, Optala has, you know, and COVID has meant more people are at home. Therefore, breaking into homes has become less attractive. But I think that's fair to say. But nevertheless, other opportunities for theft then present themselves. So, you know, when looking against the national picture, Lincolnshire presents very well in that regard across the board, and that focus is very welcome. I suppose as a more general comment, there are other areas where we are still slightly above on that national average, and although we're seeing decreases, we aren't necessarily seeing the decreases at the same level as there is in that national average. And we all know an average is something that's a dangerous thing to worry about too much, because within an average you have extremes. But it's really just to understand what you feel the value, and without going into the too much detail, as you say, we looked at violence closely last time, but in particular violence against the person is something that's clearly concerning. We're having an impact, but it's really that understanding of the ongoing intensive work that the force has been doing to tackle violence, yet we're still seeing obviously some increases in that area, whether we feel that impact is being felt, and whether there's anything else that you feel needs to be done, or whether we're absolutely on the right track.
Okay, thank you, Krista. Again, I invite colleagues. I know DCS Cox is still with us, and Chris, no doubt, will kind of have a view in terms of how we are tackling those various issues of violence. They are multifaceted in terms of their cause and effect, but perhaps, okay, as Chris, you've got your hand up first. If I go to you first, Chris, and then perhaps Andy.
Yeah, thanks, sir. I think it's an excellent question. You know, the first thing to say is that certainly when it comes to long-term prevention schemes, it may be some time before we see some of those levels decrease, which is the nature of prevention and education. I also think that you know, you will know that there's a huge amount of work going on in force, and I don't want to steal Andy's thunder too much here, because I'm sure he'll speak much more eruditely than I will, around domestic abuse, and some of that is around courage to report and courage to report offences. So we're in that strange position, I think, and I'm sure I'm rehearsing comments that have been said many times before. That part of trying to encourage people to come forward and report crime is that we will see some elevated crime levels, and I know that this campaign is ongoing, has been for some time. But until we get the true picture of what that crime's like, we will only go so far in addressing it. I don't know if Andy, if you've got anything else to say on the A front.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chief. Just very much to reinforce what's just been said. So, I mean, domestic abuse, obviously a horrid crime. We desperately need information. So much the same as the Crimestoppers update in many regards. That if people spot the signs of abuse or they've got any concerns at all, it's better to report than to wonder if they should have done, because then we can look at the bigger picture and take action. Domestic abuse, we just launched an internal board to really hone our performance around this, to make sure we're supporting victims, using things like DVPO orders, so that's domestic violence protection orders, which allows us to apply through the court to apply conditions on the offender to separate offender from victim, which I think is so important to give that victim the chance to find an alternative way of coping without that person being in their life. And very much to take positive action as well. So we've really got a significant driving force at the moment around the whole positive action drive to tackle offending and support victims around domestic abuse. Just in returns of other violent behaviour. So we've introduced a real focus around our most wanted offenders. So within that, we're looking at that higher end of threat, risk and harm. So, serious violence, other forms of serious criminality as well. So really to try and do everything we can from an intelligence front and then from an operational front to locate those people and arrest them. And likewise using technologies such as ANPR to help us intervene on those offenders that are causing most risk and most violence to our communities.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Chris. Is that okay, Commissioner?
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. I mean, I just want to be clear. I understand the challenges of welcoming increased reporting, which is always one of those difficult ones, because from a public perception point of view, it's one of those difficult ones, isn't it? How to hold the force to account when crime goes up, it's considered good because the public report more. But when crime goes down, we consider that's good because we're bearing down on crime, and it's trying to present an honest and open picture, which you are doing, that the public can understand across the piece. So I'm not disagreeing with anything that anybody has said, but it is quite difficult sometimes to understand when crime up or down is a good thing. It's quite a challenge to understand, and I think one of the things certainly with domestic abuse is that partnership space and understanding the various roles that are played across the county and how we bring those together. And I think that's true also of mental health, which obviously we've seen increases in the use of Section 136 powers, which we'll talk about later. And again, it's understanding what we're doing from a partnership point of view to try and support the community rather than it just being an additional thing that policing has to do. It's that how do we offer the right solutions, and domestic abuse is a good example of that. And we obviously invest in the perpetrator programs. We equally support the various elements around protecting victims to make sure that victims and survivors of these kinds of crimes get the support they need to be able to move on. So it's not all about the reporting, but we absolutely want to make sure that's right. But over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yep, thank you, Commissioner. Chief Constable's commentary is on page 13. We got the demand response. I don't really intend saying too much about these. I'll maybe ask Karen if she wants to say anything about the road traffic work and the road safety work that's going on. In terms of the force control room performance, there's information in there around where we're going. The responses and the times, they kind of mirror the rest of the kind of COVID graphs. It's fairly clear that as you go into lockdown, some of the call volumes change, some of the response times improve, there's less incidents and therefore you can get to them easier. And then as those incidents and calls for demand increase, again, you find that your operational resources get more and more stretched. As I mentioned right at the outset, we are at the point of continuing to recruit, and that first set of recruitment that we did back at the start of this calendar year, those officers are now what we call, they become deployable, so they're able to attend incidents, and we will see deployable resources increase steadily as we go forward from the kind of this month, next month onwards, which means that that simple equation of the number of people you have to respond to the number of calls for service that you get becomes a bit easier to manage. And whilst it's always been kind of difficult for the last 12 months plus, that should be an improving picture as we move forward. But I wasn't really going to say much more about that, but happy to answer questions. But Karen, I wonder if you want to say a couple of words about the road safety and road traffic work, if you're there. But if you're not, Commissioner, I'll just move over to questions.
No, there was a comment in the chat box from Karen saying she needed to nip out for that operational reason she alluded to earlier. Oh, apologies, I was on mute while I managed to say that. Karen had posted in the message bar that she had nipped out to deal with that operational matter.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. It normally comes up to say that that's happened on mine, but it didn't. But I've checked, and yeah, so absolutely fine. Thank you for that. In which case, Commissioner, I'll just open up to questions on this section.
Well, I mean, this is more of a comment than it is a question. I mean, I note that the average response time for urban incidents over the last 12 months against, and I dislike the word target, but it does in your paper say the word target, so I'll use your language on there. A target of 15 minutes, which covers sort of the urban areas around Lincoln in particular. The average response time for urban incidents over the last 12 months is 14:12. So you've exceeded that, which is not just over the Taller period, but over the full 12 months. And again, what's I think really impressive is that against again the target of 20 minutes in the more rural parts of Lincolnshire, which as we know is the majority of the 2,500 square miles of county that are covered, to have reached the average response time of 18:57 is again really pleasing to see. And a huge thank you needs to go out to the force as a whole for their efforts in achieving that. We know it's not easy, and as you've said, often these incidents will occur, whether it's at rush hour, whether it's in adverse weather conditions, any number of other things that will slow the ability of people to attend incidents within a given time. And actually, one of the things I've always been focused on isn't just the amount of time it takes to get somewhere, it's the quality of service that's delivered once they arrive, because actually if we get the call element right, they're responding to the right incidents, and when they arrive they deal with it in the correct way, that is what we ultimately want. So I'm absolutely not about chasing just a time, but I think it's that whole quality piece, and I think that's something that has been worked on quite hard over the last few months, so it's just really a thank you regarding that. One of the things regarding the road collision work, obviously we know that investments have been made in recent months to try and enhance the roads policing offer for Lincolnshire, and that work continues. We know that we have significant numbers of tragedies on our roads, as well as very importantly criminals using our road network to sort of use our communities to be the victims of their crime. And I don't know whether I appreciate Karen would be the ideal person, but whether there is anybody there that can talk to some of the progress made, because I know investments have been made in that tackling criminality across the road network that we'd committed to as part of the last council tax uplift. It would be useful if somebody could talk to that at all.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I mean, I'll say a few words and then invite other colleagues that if they have things that they wish to contribute. I mean, essentially, the investment has looked across a number of different activities. So one of the first is providing kits, making sure that people have the right equipment to be able to carry out road traffic enforcement and interventions. So investing in new speed equipment, whether that's with the local authority around the traffic enforcement they do, whether it's within the vehicles that we have as part of the road safety partnership, or whether it's the things that would be described in other ways as the handheld speed guns that are distributed, but the technology is far more advanced than it was a number of years ago. So making investments in the physical kit to allow people to carry out road safety and road intervention activity. And then training, making sure that people have got the right skills to do it. So that's looking at community speed watch, looking at PCSOs within communities, giving them the powers and the training to be able to carry out either warnings, or if it goes further than that, into looking at giving out actual enforcement tickets and enforcement activity. And then looking to kind of boost the work that the Road Safety Partnership has done itself. So we invested in the Special Constabulary in that area to specifically have more people within that area, so that we could deploy more often. We also use student officers as part of their training programme. They spent periods of time where they were deployed specifically on road traffic enforcement, and that also had a kind of positive effect in terms of bringing home to the public of Lincolnshire the way in which we expected them to comply with the Fatal 4 and make sure that they were driving appropriately for the conditions and within the law. We have more planned, so there's more to come, and that really sits within the work that we're doing around the general uplift of resources that I've mentioned a couple of times already. We're trying to ensure that just doesn't happen in one particular place, that we do our best to uplift in the areas of priority, and there's absolutely no doubt that road safety, road collision reduction is one of the areas that as a force we will be investing in the coming 2 to 3 years. So that's a kind of general overview of the range of things that have taken place since the commitment to invest in this area. I'd invite Chris, I suppose, as one of the kind of divisional commanders. Is there anything, Chris, you want to add to that picture?
Just a couple of more tactical bits, possibly for me. Firstly, just how well received Community Speed Watch is being both by communities and by officers. So we've worked to strengthen the link between those Speed Watch teams and our neighbourhood police and officers to make sure that both sides appreciate each other and can support each other actually. And then on the roads policing side of the house, Mr. Skelly has already said that there are plans afoot to increase our resourcing there alongside some of the other functions within the force. But we've also, I think, been more effective using the resources we already have. So you may have seen over recent weeks, there have been a couple of occasions where some of our specialist officers in the south of the county in particular have been on hand to deal with hare courses, and have used their specialist equipment and training to make sure that those people are detained and denied use of our roads and then put through the criminal justice system. And the same token when it comes to some of our special constabulary officers working on the Safer Roads team. So the fact that we've been able to train and equip our volunteer police officers to be able to assist, is fairly rare still within the police state of England and Wales, and it is given us fantastic capability alongside what we already have. So I'm afraid that was a little bit of a ramble, but I guess the takeaway point is over recent weeks we have seen really good use of our resource in some of the more remote parts of the county, which certainly as the area commander for the East as my day job, I've been hugely encouraged by, to make sure that those people who travel long distances to commit crime in Lincolnshire are brought to book by officers who can actually stop them.
Thank you, Chris. Andy, were you wanting to come in there?
Yeah, if I can, Chief, thank you. Just to, obviously, this is an issue close to my heart, with bear in mind my last post I had before joining the force. So just some things that we are doing. So we've now got a dedicated intelligence cell 24/7 that works within the control room. They're very closely monitoring ANPR. I think, Commissioner, you made the point between road safety and criminality, and so often our most dangerous drivers are also our most active criminals. So I think the use of ANPR, and we're trying to identify and develop a list of our most dangerous drivers with active links to criminality, putting them onto the ANPR and then taking positive action against them. So I think there's opportunities around that. And then just secondly, I know that something that's coming down the line is the use of dash cam in the county, and I think making the public part of the solution in terms of reporting offences to us, which we can take action to, is nearly upon us, which I think is a really good move for the county. The phrase I always use is the police can't be everywhere, but the public can. So I think it acts as both a deterrence and an enforcement opportunity for road safety.
Thank you both.
No, I think that's all really heartening, and I know with some of the other investments around other special issues such as the dog unit, the new vehicles that are being rolled out to them also have AMPR, so it's good to see that sort of coverage across the force increasing, because as we've said, that intelligence that it gathers is very valuable, I know. But I think that concludes that section. Chief, if you want to move on.
Thank you. The next page is page 17 for the commentary in terms of intervention. We've mentioned already the domestic abuse and sexual offending and some of the areas around that. The bit I'd highlight is that we have been both locally and nationally looking at whether, with the easing of some restrictions after the first lockdown, we'd see a sort of bulge in reporting, a sort of an uptick in reporting, and we did see some of that. And then, you know, we're expecting sort of similar experiences as people are able to get to contact others, having been in a kind of lockdown situation. Trying to work out ways where we get people to get access to the ability to report and come forward without having to wait until restrictions are eased, and that's something that we're doing in kind of partnership with lots of agencies, not just local authority, but voluntary agencies as well. And the other issue that I'd raised, you mentioned it as well, was in relation to mental health and the number of mental health incidents that we have become involved in during the last few months. As you're aware, I raised this on the county-wide wellbeing board, and there was a fair amount of commentary made by those others present in terms of the amount of work that the county has been involved in, both with the local NHS providers, but also as a local authority. And the only thing I can still ask is that we continue to do our best to work together. We had very positive plans that were due for full implementation during the course of this year around the hub and spoke model of providing mental health support across Lincolnshire County, and some of that has been unfortunately kind of not paused, has been more difficult to push out because of the inability to have sort of lots of face-to-face meetings and so on. And we do hope that the full positive effect of that will come into play in the coming 12 months. And we'll have the intervention and prevention outcome that we'd hoped it would have had during the course of the last 12 months. But it's worrying to see the number of mental health incidents that we have been dealing with recently. But I'll pause there, Commissioner, and deal with any questions.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. We've obviously been working very hard together on a lot of work around the mental health strand, and I think that's come on leaps and bounds over the last year, 18 months. And it is frustrating that this very difficult period has seen us not being able to make the progress that we would have liked to otherwise on some of these areas. But I do feel that we're plugged into the right partnership spaces to be able to continue to make that difference, and I think that's really important, both from the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner and from the force perspective. And obviously I'm aware that Chris Davison there, who has just put his hand up, is the force mental health lead, so I will bring him in to comment about that, if I may. I do think as well, as I'm looking down this section before I bring Chris in, when I look at the child sexual exploitation figures, again, is one of those where it's very much a partnership space, I'm aware, regarding raising awareness, getting people to refer concerns, etc. But it is slightly concerning, going back to what you were saying before, that there's been a significant decrease in the amounts of reports made. It's one of those areas where we tend to see quite a consistent picture, and I guess that is something that we need to be conscious of, and whether that is, as we were discussing earlier, another area for a campaign to try and just make sure that we're getting the full picture of reporting, because I think it is important that safeguarding of children is something that we're all very invested in. But Chris, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. Just on that mental health needs. I think the first thing is I am now old enough to have remembered where we came from with mental health in the county. So if we were talking about mental health in the county 6 or 7 years ago, we'd have been talking about 290 odd people detained in police cells for Section 136 in Lincolnshire. So on there, we've detained one person in police custody, and that was as a result of Pete Hodgkins Centre not being available. I think just talk about the context now operating, which is in a county where we are doing a huge amount in partnership, and there is no doubt that the current conditions mean that some of that has slowed down. But the 24/7 line for people, which is now operated by LPFT, I haven't got the figures to hand, but I know from the last time I saw them, which was in the last 6 weeks, they're very much on the uptake. So there's more diversion coming that way online. And we continue to engage with and assist partners in transforming mental health services in Lincolnshire to make sure that we have a strong voice. So both I and Chief Inspector Jim Trafford sit on the transformation group that's helping LPFT and other partners design what the system will look like in the future, with the aim of making sure that people who are unwell get the best treatment that they can as early as they can. And just on a minor point here, in the report it talks around under mental health, increase of offences. These aren't offences, they're health episodes, and it's just really important to make that point, that police only want to be involved in mental health as a last resort where we can keep people safe. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Karen, are you wishing to come in? I've noticed your picture is there, but I didn't know whether that meant that you wish to comment or not. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth if you don't.
Well, now you've put me on the spot, Commissioner, I'm going to have to. It was just around the comments that you made around child sexual exploitation, and to let you know we've got a programme of enhanced training delivery going on in-house, working with our partners around Bernardo's and children's services, etc., under what we've termed op vigilance, which is ensuring that we've got the eyes and ears of all partners as well as policing out looking for the signs and symptoms of people and children specifically who might be under the influence of being exploited through all sorts of different vulnerabilities, and that you should be seeing something over the coming weeks and months around the activity around that as we go forward, and really happy to bring something to the next public assurance meeting around what we're doing on that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The only other area that sort of stood out to me as something I wanted to comment on was around sexual assaults and rapes in particular, and I think it's one of those areas of business that is obviously exceedingly sensitive and difficult, as is child sexual abuse and indeed mental health. But I think it's absolutely right that we recognise that we have a sexual assault referral centre in the county, which means people can either self-refer or be referred to that to get help and support. And in the last 10 years that they've been operating, it is their 10th anniversary at the moment. They have seen some 2,275 men and women through their doors to offer that help and support. And I think it's just a thank you to them from me for the work they do. And I know how closely that they do work with a number of agencies, policing included, but it's absolutely the case that people can get the help and support they need if they have been assaulted, and they can be provided the support ultimately if they wish to then refer that to the police. The support they are given through the SARC is not conditional on reporting to the police. It is about help and support. Obviously, we would wish any perpetrator of a crime to be brought to book, so we would want to work to make sure that people felt confident if they were able to do that. But I just thought it was worth noting that that's a significant number of people that have been offered that help and support. And I note in the papers there that in the last 12 months, 802 reported rape offences, 251 of which were not recent offences, so 31%. But it is one of those areas of business that it is continually very challenging with national figures when we look at how many people that are reporting rape ultimately end up in court seeing their perpetrator brought to book. And whether there's anything you'd wish to comment on from a policing perspective about the Lincolnshire approach to that. It's just something that's been very much in the news in recent months, and I just thought it would be useful for you to offer a reassuring comment regarding the approach that Lincolnshire takes.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will ask kind of colleagues to contribute. Essentially, that final point you made, yeah, absolutely reassuring the people of Lincolnshire that Lincolnshire Police, treat all of the things that they come to us with absolute professionalism and respect, and that it is our aim as the police service to support those who are the victims of harm, and to ensure that we make the absolute best investigation we can to provide the best information we can to the criminal justice system, so to the Crown Prosecution Service and ultimately the courts. It can sometimes be a very difficult and daunting thing to navigate as a person who's a member of the public, and we're very conscious of the support we can get from others that can help people through that process while still retaining our independence from it, and ensuring that we're able to report objectively to the Crown. But you're right, there's a massive amount of activity in this area, and I would think that Andy Cox, as our head of crime, might want to say a few words about it, and then perhaps kind of Karen coming in as well. But Andy, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, will do, Chief. Thank you. So absolutely, I mean, most of it's been said in fairness around the absolute passion we have, and I've obviously worked with detectives that investigate these really severe sexual offence cases. The passion that they have to investigate it in the best possible sense, support the victim, listen to the victim, make sure that victim's got the confidence to stay with the process as well. And that's one of our greatest challenges in terms of the whole criminal justice system, and we're obviously working very closely with the CPS around that. We have had some really exceptional successes lately, which I've asked for our teams to sort of dwell on and actually learn the lessons from, to see how we can take that forward in other cases as well. But it's an absolute focus. We're doing the very best we can, but it's very much a case of a wider criminal justice system challenge, and I think we all need to work really collectively around that and look at national best practice as well.
And I think, just to add on to what Andy's just covered there about the dedication of the officers, that is seen in the standard of files that go before the Crown Prosecution Service, and it's also seen in the standard of outcomes that we get when we get to court. So that's really good. Of course, we're always striving to do better when we get them, but on the flip side of all of this, we need to do an awful lot more as partners and as society to tackle the issue, which is, it can be endemic, and having a preventative approach, and what is okay, what is not okay, having those messages very early on in adolescence as people grow up. So it's not just about dealing with the symptoms and dealing with the aftermath. We really need to look to how do we get ahead of the game so that we make this a thing of the past as it should be, so that we're not having to investigate them.
No, thank you for that. And on that, I'm happy for us to move on to the next section, Chief.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So the commentaries on pages 20 and 21 in terms of outcomes. We've talked about our road safety approach. I wasn't going to really go into the driving enforcement side. We have the kind of 100% across the board for firearms licensing, a really good news story in terms of how that process works, and kind of leads the way in the country in terms of the support to those who hold firearms kind of licenses. And then the criminal justice issues. Just to say a couple of words on that. Essentially, as you've heard me say before at the PAM meeting, this, outside of the health crisis, for us as a member of the criminal justice system, is the kind of next largest crisis. mainly because of the backlog that the system has had to essentially create because of the lack of court space, the lack of time within a court setting to be able to process all of the cases that the police service and others have been putting to the courts. This has meant that we are in a position where we're working very hard with others in that system to try and find different resolutions. And those resolutions, we're mindful that they have victims involved with them, and that whatever we're doing, we're trying to do it with the best interests of all the parties involved. But it remains a real problem, and there are some other things within the system, changes to some of the guidance that we get from the Crown Prosecution Service, which continue to make that a really complicated and difficult area for us to work in. I think I'll just kind of pause there because I've said a fair amount on that in the past. If you have a question at all, Commissioner, we'll try and answer it, and then if colleagues have got other things they want to say about the outcomes or the criminal justice process, then I'm sure they'll add it. But perhaps if we do a question first.
Okay. So I mean, yeah, I mean, two things really. One, the firearm licensing. I think you obviously allude to a very good point, which is the 20,000 people that have lawfully held firearms, around 50,000 of those firearms across the county. I mean, it's a hugely impressive result to be hitting 100% of those licenses, both new and variations and renewals, etc. is an exceptional result, and the force should be commended for that. I think it does go wider than just offering the really good service to those 20,000 people. It's about keeping our entire community safe. I mean, we know that across the board, our lawfully held firearms community are an exceptionally responsible and safe group of individuals that largely understand their responsibilities and do a good job with that. But nevertheless, the licensing system is vital in keeping our wider community safe, and I think the force is doing an outstanding job with that. I remember before I took up this role, having a conversation with Chris Davison about this very problem and how the force were sadly at the other end of this national table and the challenges in that. So we've come 100% in that time, which is excellent to see. Certainly, just with a specific question around the criminal justice element, the use of evidence review officers is mentioned in there as a new approach to combat the backlogs and delays, and I wondered whether that will link to the case file quality improvement work.
Yep, Karen, do you want to field that one?
Yep. Just struggling to get off mute there, and that's exactly what the evidence review case officers are going to support, Commissioner, is the quality of the case files that go before CPS to ensure that we get the file quality right first time. We've gone out to advert for people who've got the experience in putting these quality together. We've got the amount of case files that we collate and put forward at the moment. The checks and balances behind those case files are not always as we would want them to be, because we don't have as many sergeants as we used to have across all of our teams. So it's about ensuring that we get that quality right first time, we get the best practice, we look at the common trends, etc., so that it cuts down the amount of to-ing and froing between ourselves and between the CPS. We have a lot of cases that go to the CPS at the moment and come back with action plans on with various different elements, some of which should be challenged back to CPS. And we need to be better at that, but also better at putting the case file in the first time without the need for them to come back with further checks and balances. And so the investment on the evidence review officers is for a short-term period to get our standards up to a particular point right across the whole of the organisation. So then with the intention of at some point they will step back away from that.
Okay, so your last point, I think, answered my next question, which is that in effect what they're trying to do is ensure that the organisation is capable, if you like, of delivering that high quality of case file standard across the board. They're not there just to continually, forever and a day, pick up failed case files and actually rectify them. It's very much more that rectifying the problem for the longer term. So I suppose the other question, obviously you're recruiting new people all the time, which is great news in and of itself. That there will presumably come a time when these people are no longer in these posts. How will you ensure that ongoing the standard remains as high as you will hopefully get it to as a result of these officers being in post?
Well, that will be part of the programme of work once we've got them in post. It's to look at those longer term trends to see whether there's any automated processes, checks and balances that we can do for those common problems, but also ensuring that we have some sort of audit capability as we step back, probably in 2 years' time, from these officers being in place, that we've got those common standards that are evident right across the whole organisation, and have an audit function where we just dip sample where the common problems are to make sure that we keep that standard up right across the board. Then within the crime department, under Andy Cox's department, the crime standards superintendent will have responsibility and governance to ensure that that is the case right across the whole organisation.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. That's my only question on that section, Chief.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner. I'll move on then to pages 23 and 24, which is the commentary on satisfaction. Just a couple of points from me, and I believe that it's probably a good thing for us to put on the agenda for the next PAM a more detailed discussion on the satisfaction data and information that it contains, mainly because we've been watching this kind of very closely and looking into it in very much detail, and the plan which we then produced in order to improve user satisfaction, particularly the kept informed part of user satisfaction, has many aspects to it. So everything I might have said today about our response to the downturn in user satisfaction on keeping informed is in that plan, which we are currently enacting under the leadership of John McAdam, Chief Superintendent McAdam. So what I would suggest, Commissioner, is that we invite, or you invite me to present a report, or sorry, you invite the Chief Constable to present a report next time on the public satisfaction, and we'll give you a thorough report on where we are with that. And we would hope to see those figures significantly improve as a result of the focus that John has brought in terms of putting victims first. And the only other thing was in relation to restorative justice, we'll see that the number of referrals are significantly down on last year. That's a direct result of COVID-19. We would expect that to return to higher levels in the coming 12-month period. It is a resolution route that we feel is correct, and so we'll continue to use that once we are out of the current pandemic influence. But that was really it in terms of what I had to say about that section, which I know is kind of like trying to defer it a bit. But so happy to answer questions if we can today, but I suggest a more detailed discussion next time.
No, and I concur with that. I'm happy to take that suggestion. I think it is an appropriate thing to bring forward and to look at the next meeting.
OK, thank you, Commissioner. In which case, if there are no other questions on that section, the final one is page 26, which is in relation to resources. I suppose that, again, just repeating a little bit of what I said at the outset of the meeting, two parts of this, which are both positive. Firstly, that the deployable resource levels are set to improve. We are kind of, if you like, at a low ebb, but that was something that we were aware of and was a kind of function of our kind of budgetary position from last year. But with the national uplift, we will see the people that we recruited at the start of this calendar year coming into their own and being deployed to incidents to keep the public safe. And what we're also going to see is that, largely speaking, as a result of all of the interventions which Andrew spoke about in terms of protection at work and positive kind of ways of keeping your self very much hygienic and clean and distanced, has had an effect on the other kinds of easily communicable, low-level kinds of the ailments that would normally result in short-term absences. So the kind of tummy bugs, the colds, the short-term issues that people can pick up just by working together. A lot of that we feel has actually been positively reduced, which means that we've actually had excellent sickness levels being excellently low, and we currently are still in that position where we are in the colour coding term blue, which means that we're at the best end of our ability to deploy people, because we've got very low officer and staff sickness, which is a very positive place for us to be. So I didn't have any further comment on resources, but again, if there's any questions, Commissioner, happy to answer them.
No, I think overall, just to say, it appears to be a very positive picture given the very trying circumstances that we face. I mean, I guess an area that I know will be of concern is the continued pressure for people to support anything over and above the normal activity. So whether these are national events, regional events, or local, where they come over and above the normal day job. As we all know, there aren't extra officers to deploy. It's the same officers working additional hours, and there obviously comes a point where people do need their sleep and their rest. Otherwise, we are in danger of them being off for more prolonged periods. And I know that's something the force monitors closely, but certainly I'm obviously aware that going back to where we started this conversation today with the COVID situation, the government has provided some additional resource to help forces with, for example, cover overtime costs, etc. But yet again, what that is in effect is the same people missing out on days where they should be resting. And I know that's a very difficult balance, but at the moment it seems to be a very healthy picture given all of those circumstances. Karen, you wanted to come in?
You're on mute, I'm afraid, Karen.
Sorry, just in relation to the overtime aspect, as you mentioned, we do keep a real tight eye on how that is being managed to make sure that we don't overstretch individuals, and looking at the necessity for that. But what we've also done is ensure that all of that is captured. So as you've rightly said, that the government will have offered support for that. We still need to realise that support at the moment for overtime for spending for this. So that is not being recouped yet, but it will be at some point. In relation to mutual aid as well, regarding both the exit from the EU, we do have mutual aid requests going into the end of January now, which we resourced for, and that shouldn't have a huge impact on us as a force, but we do need to also keep an eye on that towards the end of this year and early into next year to make sure that both we in Lincolnshire are safe and have the right resourcing, but that we support the national effort to ensure the whole country goes through this as smoothly as possible.
Thank you for that. Andrew, you wish to come in?
Well, it was just thinking about a time when the pandemic is over in terms of attendance and well-being. Whilst I think masks and everything may no longer be with us, I can see there are some things that we will almost certainly wish to keep up within the force. So, I mean, Commissioner, on your walk up to your office, I think you passed 3 or 4 fixed hand sanitizer units. I'm not sure we'll be taking those away. That continual use, encouragement to keep hands clean, not to pick up whatever germs might be left anywhere. I think the other non-work-based thing that I think we've really learned and we're looking to take forward is actually people that can't attend work are working a lot now with the agile working that we brought in following your investment last year. That actually we are seeing people be more productive on those occasions when attending the workplace is no longer practical, sometimes for reasons of just physical health, but they're fine in every other way and able to work and still assist us. And I think that's what's led to, I mean, pretty well a 25% improvement, as in lowering of our sickness figures, which accounts for putting the equivalent of about 10 to a dozen police officers onto the front.
Which is excellent news, and again, obviously supporting the fact that any positive changes we can make to support, you know, the well-being of officers, and through that the service that the public receives as a result is obviously to be welcomed. So, you know, I think you're right. I think nationally there's bound to be a review, not just for policing, but for private and public sectors collectively, as to what we've all learnt as a result of 2020. And I think in part the country is going to be in a much more agile working position than it's ever been before. We're still seeing the limitations of some Wi-Fi challenges, particularly in rural counties like Lincolnshire, but again, they're probably in better shape than they've ever been. And I just think that we will all see new ways of working that ultimately will have leapt us forward. So despite the challenges, despite the downsides, of which there are plenty, I think we will see some plus sides, not least of which I think to people's health and well-being once we get out the other side of it. So thank you for that. Now that concludes the report. Whether there's anything else you wish to say in summing up of that, or whether you're happy for me to move on.
Happy to move on, Commissioner. Thank you.
Okay, well that is the final element for today's meeting. I mean, it just remains for me to thank everybody for attending. Aubrey, do we have a date for the next meeting, please?
We do indeed, Commissioner. It's scheduled for the afternoon of the 24th of February.
Okay, so not only will we have had Christmas, we'll have had Valentine's Day, and we'll be on our way to spring. So that feels a long way off at the moment, but I'm sure it'll soon come round. And once again, just to thank everybody for coming, and obviously specifically to you, Bill, for not just attending today, but for all that you've done for Lincolnshire while you've been the Chief Constable. It has been a pleasure to work with you, and obviously in the next few days we'll continue to see you, but as far as these meeting goes, this is your final one, so thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. And on that, everybody, just thank you for your attendance. That concludes today's meeting, and we will be back with the next one in February. Thank you.